Everybody deserves the chance to review Wicked, so here's ours. Let's talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So, today we are going to be reviewing the movie Wicked. But before we get into that, you already know what time it is. We're here to give you movie recommendations. So, what is the best recent thing that you've seen?
I'm going to follow on from last week's one where I said I watched the first 6 episodes of Arcane Season 2. So we reached the ending. Very sad to be at this point because obviously everyone knows how much I love the series. Did it stick the landing? Somewhat. I'll say somewhat. Again, it was for the most part like really enjoyable. I think like episode 7 really like had the feels this season, just kind of like exploring an alternate reality where things didn't go as sort of dark and as like sour as it did in season 1. I still feel like it was rushed. I'm kind of happy with all the characters' conclusions where they left off with with everyone involved in like whatever part they had to play in their little stories. I'm happy with that. It just felt rushed, and I feel like we could have maybe stretched this out for 2 seasons or so to like really feel the effects of the story that they were trying to tell in here, even though I was still happy with it. So yeah, that's my recommendation again this week, 2 weeks in a row.
Was it like a closed ending, open ending, sad ending?
It was, I wouldn't say it was a sad ending at all. It was kind of like, I wouldn't say your hero's ending. Some characters' stories concluded how you probably expected, happy ending, this, that, and the other. Some were left open-ended in terms of there's possibilities for more, and I know that they are doing more seasons or new stories based on different regions of the world. So there are like some where you can kind of see how they can be involved in other stories and other parts of the universe. And then there's Jinx is left off in an interesting place, and it's kept fans guessing as to where she is, basically. So it's a cool ending. It's a cool ending, I would say, but definitely needed one more season.
Well, I've watched quite a few things, like for example, Doom Prophecy, Jackal, but I think I went on a Texas Chainsaw marathon, which was great, but I think a lot of people have already seen Texas Chainsaw and they've seen Friday the 13th. I went on a Friday the 13th marathon, so I'm trying to think of something which I don't think people have seen. So something that I liked a bit was called Bagman. That was pretty cool. It was pretty decent. It was just a great popcorn movie, pretty much about there's a father that basically he faces like a childhood threat, which is pretty much like a demon. He is kind of like a demon, and he pretty much like takes his victims and puts him in their bag. But obviously before that happens, he torments them through a lot of, I'd say, through hallucinations in a way. So yeah, it was a cool watch. It was a cool watch. There was some notable actors, Sam Claflin and Antonia Thomas. She was in Misfits and she was in The Good Doctor as well, so she's a good actress as well. But yeah, it was a decent horror movie.
So I also watched a bunch of different things, and none of them really worked out for me. I gave that Amazon Cruel Intentions show a try because I really like the original from the 90s, and this is just not good. Like I was really disappointed with that. So that's not my pick this week. So my pick instead is season 1 of Stan Against Evil, which is, and I've watched maybe I think the first 7 episodes or so, and it's a pretty episodic horror comedy show about this small town that's essentially haunted by witches. And they essentially put a curse on the sheriff of that town. And so every time there's a new sheriff, the witches try to kill them. And the story is essentially about the old sheriff retires, and he's the only one who has made it to retirement age in like 200 years. And this new sheriff comes from out of town and sets up shop in this small town, and she's way out of her depth because she just really doesn't know about the supernatural and the occult and stuff like that. And each episode, essentially a witch or a demon or something shows up and causes some kind of problem, and then the new sheriff has to team up with the old sheriff, who really just wants to watch his World War II documentaries and wants to be left alone because he's done with this crap. Like it is like a very formulaic comedy that is very, very much like if you've seen Evil Dead, it's basically a ripoff of that in terms of creature designs, but it's just episodic fun. You can just put on an episode and be entertained if you like the general vibe of it. And so for that reason, that's my recommendation for this week.
We're gonna move on to The Wicked. So Daniel, please, can you let the people know what the hell Wicked is about?
So Wicked Part 1 is, I think at this point everybody's figured out that it's a two-parter, right? That they kind of hit that in the marketing, but I think people have figured this out by now. So it's the first half of an adaptation of the musical, which is one of the biggest musicals ever made. It's essentially a prequel of The Wizard of Oz, where the good witch and the evil witch are roommates at Magic University. They become friends despite all odds. And then in the end, they have to pick sides when it comes to good and evil, essentially. And they pick different sides. That's essentially the plot of Wicked. So what did we think of the movie?
This was shockingly very funny in so many places. And I think primarily carried by Ariana Grande's character, who was sort of, she executed the spoiled, sort of really pretentious, sort of ultra popular sort of character really well in this movie. And there was just like so many parts that I was just like, everything that she was doing was just like hilarious. And anytime she was like on screen, it was like really captivating for me on that part. Also, like what else I enjoyed in this movie was just the characterization of the Green Witch. I need the character names. What's the green one called?
Elphaba.
Elphaba. So the characterization of Elphaba, I really enjoyed in this, in terms of sort of the difficulties of sort of kind of like living in your skin, and sort of how everyone kind of like treats you based on sort of your skin color, and sort of just about like how as an individual sort of you kind of like respond to it, and you kind of like try to be strong with it, but even though you kind of like portray yourself to be sort of a certain way, it's still like kind of like kills on the inside, and you just kind of like still have that craving for acceptance and craving to sort of be part of sort of the popular group. So I think all of that was done really well. The whole kind of like nice versus kind debate as well, that you can kind of like see between the two as well. I think they did a really good job in terms of sort of kind of like portraying the difference between sort of someone that's kind of like nice just for this sort of for their own gains, or like nice for what they can get out of it, versus sort of like someone that genuinely has like some level of kindness within them, and sort of just does kind of like because of sort of that's who they are. So I think the movie did a really good job of sort of portraying that as well. But the negatives was the pacing of the story. Like this movie is completely bloated. It did not need to be 2 hours and 41 minutes. There's like a large part in the middle where it kind of like just like meanders, and it kind of like slows down, and it starts to take me out of the movie. Mainly when, who's the male character?
Fiyero.
So mainly when like Fiyero is introduced, and they go on like this like kind of like long singing sequence until they get to the ball that they end up going to, or the disco party, wherever they end up going to. It's just like everything in between that was just dragging. Like it didn't feel fun. And I will say a lot of the music in this was very forgettable, and that's probably maybe criminal to say, but there isn't anything that really stuck with me at all in terms of like any of the music. The only one maybe like the whole like popular song, "You're Gonna Be Pop You," yeah, like that one. It's probably the only one that actually stuck with me, but everything else, like I couldn't even begin to remember what any of the other songs were in this. So I think a bit of a mixed bag. I think the story kind of, there was like key parts of the stories that were forgotten about. We looked the whole like plot about some of the animals, and some of them kind of like losing the ability to speak, and sort of what was going on with them seemed like it was forgotten about for large parts of the movie as well. So it didn't quite go. And then there's other parts that we can kind of discuss in the spoiler section as well. So for me, enjoyable, but had many problems within it.
Now, I was surprised watching this movie, because as the world knows, I am not a big fan of musicals. So of course that's going to be one of my negatives about the film. I'm not going to say, okay, now, so apparently
Already. So I can see the comments already. You reviewing a musical and you don't like musicals.
one of the reasons now, I'm not one of, so the musical scenes are going to be my kind of like critique. However, in terms of the duration, I like long movies. And the reason why, even though I do feel like this movie was long, that's not going to really be a critique of mine because apparently this is one of the longest Broadway shows ever in like just theater. So it pretty much, so it makes sense for the movie to be 3 hours long. But as I was saying, even though I'm not a big fan of musicals, and I kind of had to like drag through the musical scenes because none of the musical scenes were memorable for me whatsoever. The only one was probably the end because obviously that's the one that was pretty much marketed in the trailers and everywhere else. But yeah, besides that, I was surprised. This was really a good film. I found this film to be very emotionally invoking. Like I just really like the story, man. I really like the story. I felt like it had a lot of relevancy. Like it felt at times that it was like a reflection of how society can be when and how they react when they just to things that are different from them. And I think they definitely execute that really well, especially with what's her name? Elf?
Elphaba.
Yeah, especially with Elphaba's character. And it felt like it was mature enough for a mixed audience because I was so scared that this was going to be like a theater type of show where they're very extravagant and very OD by the way that they act. But in terms of like the individual performances, which is definitely a highlight for me, it was especially Ariana Grande. I was so surprised by the way. I didn't know she could act. Like apparently she was in a show back in the day on Disney called something. My friend showed me. I forgot what it's called, but Vicious. I don't know what it's called, but she doesn't even look like how she used to look like back in the days. I didn't even realize that was her. But I didn't know that she could act. So seeing her before, I think her performance was definitely a highlight performance, especially Elva. Her performance was definitely like it was just good. Like just the way that her the treatment that she was receiving was so brutal. That's why I felt like, yo, this is actually a really good show because like it didn't feel like I said, it didn't feel like a theater show. It didn't feel like corny, cheesy. Because I thought it was gonna be corny and cheesy. It wasn't that. I had a really good time. I was surprised. Yeah, man, I had a very good time. Like I said, besides the music scenes, that's my critique. I didn't think that, personally for me, I didn't think there was nothing wrong with. I didn't think like there was like any plot holes. I didn't think there was nothing wrong with the story. I think the story was executed well. I think like it was executed.
I found some we can share later.
Okay, cool. But yeah, I found it to be good. I just had issues with obviously the music scenes. None of them were memorable for me. Although I didn't find it overbearing. I think it wasn't like the Joker. Even though it had more music scenes than the Joker, it felt like the music scenes in Joker felt more overbearing than the Wicked. So yeah, man. All in all, I had a surprisingly good time with this.
Daniel.
Okay, time to be unpopular.
It's time to burst the bubble.
Yeah. All right. So I think I have two big criticisms of this movie. So bottom line is I didn't enjoy it. Like I'm not a musical guy, but I'm okay with a good musical. I've seen musicals with very catchy music and great performances and set pieces and so on. So I can get on board with that, and I was ready to be on board with that. I've got two big criticisms of this movie, and I think one is gonna make me unpopular, and the other one I think we can agree on. First one is I think the whole theme of discrimination and stuff like that is quite surface level and quite childish in the way it's done. Like it's extremely on the nose. It's very one-dimensional. It doesn't bother to ground it in its story or in its world or in its characters at all. It's just characters just say the obvious thing over and over again for 2 hours. And one example of this is that the movie doesn't make clear why being green is bad. Like there are different, like this is like this super cosmopolitan, diverse place, and people are okay with people of all shapes, sizes, backgrounds, talking animals, everything, but being green is over the line. And you can sell me on that, right? You can say, okay, that's the stigma, that's the stereotype, that's this historical reason for it. And then I would be on board with it. I would have accepted anything, but that's just nothing at all. And I'm assuming it's like that in the musical as well. And they're kind of constrained a lot by what's in the musical, right? Because it's a very faithful adaptation. But I just found it unsatisfying on that front. The other side of that is the purging of the animals is completely unmotivated. Like there's no, like for me, like I'm from Germany, right? So my immediate comparison is 1930s Germany, right? And I know how that worked, and I know why the average person was on board with it at the time and why it went as far as it did. And so I'm looking for parallels, right? and they're completely missing here. There's nothing to just suggest why the animals are a target, why the scapegoating of them works, why nobody does anything, why nobody speaks up for them, why it is the wizards, like why the wizard benefits from purging the animals. There's nothing whatsoever. It's not even half-hearted. It's not even simplistic. It's completely missing. And I think if your movie is almost 3 hours long and it's the core of your movie, then there should be something there to justify it, just to show how it can work and why this happens and why people go along with it and so on. And if you are tackling serious and important subjects like this, you cannot simply handwave these things, right? This is not just a story about being the outsider at school. Like this wants to be more than this. And then I think we can expect a little bit more from it. And it was completely missing. And I was not on board with that. So that was one part of it. Second part of it is that I think it's 2.5 hours long, and like more than 2.5 hours. And I think the pacing is completely messed up. So I think the part that's really interesting is the last half hour when they go to the wizard and they see how the sausage is made, and they see what the wizard is really like, and they have to pick sides, and they have to choose between what's right and what's expected, and they have to choose between their conscience and their friendship, and like all of these things could be good if they were properly set up in the first 2 hours. And it really wasn't. Like a lot of it is it's like we have a checklist of things we want to do in those 2 hours where we're at the university. But we're skipping lots and lots of different things. So exactly why Elphaba and Glinda become friends, and why Glinda wants to stick up for Elphaba for the first time in her life. Like why she wants to do the difficult thing as opposed to the popular thing for the first time in her life. And all of these things are important milestones for these characters. And it simply does not even try to justify it. Or if it does, it cuts so many corners that it stops working, in my opinion. And if the entire point of the movie is this parting of ways where these two characters find each other and then they go separate ways again, like the reason for both of those parts has to be really well done in order for the movie to work. And I think it isn't. That's my bottom line with this movie.
I can't believe, right? I'm actually going to defend the musical. And I can't believe what I'm about to say. It's actually the first time.
Sorry, I didn't even get to the music. I think that's bad too.
But this is actually the first time where I can't lie, Daniel, I think I disagree with most of the things that you said. I think, okay, so the first point where you said about so you said
the description being kind of like surface level and being like too on the nose, essentially.
Before we get into details, do we agree or disagree that this is if you're tackling an important topic like this, you should do it well?
Of course,
or is it enough to talk about it in any way? Like, because I think that is where the disconnect is a lot of the time, where people say, well, it talks about this important topic, therefore it's a good movie. And I'm not accusing you like of taking that point, but many people do, I think. And I think that because of that, bad tellings of those kinds of stories get a pass a lot of the time, because people are just saying, well, it's saying it has a good message, therefore I want to support it. But like, are we on the same page that in general, if you tell that kind of story, you have an obligation to tell it well?
Yeah,
of course. And it depends on like how you're looking at it. So as I was watching it, I was more empathizing with the experience of Elphaba in the situation, in terms of like walking into a room, and like every room she walks into, she's completely different from everyone. Like she's like receiving looks just because of the color of her skin, essentially. But yeah, for me, like as I was watching it, it was more like the empathy side of things, and like kind of like a part of like the relatability of it, even like the aspect of she's before anyone can say anything, she's getting ahead of it and like having to like say about like, no, I didn't do this, and no, whatever, yes, I was born like this, and whatever, like you just kind of like disarming people before they can even like say anything, and and knowing that she's probably had to learn and develop this over like years and years and years of like constant comments and constant vitriol from people, was like really empathetic. And like it all culminated to the ballroom scene where you've got people that are just like, just because of like the way she is, they're like constantly trying to embarrass her or like make her look some type of way. And then it culminates to that scene where she thinks like, for once, okay, like Galinda's done something nice for my sister. I'll do like, and she's like possibly done something nice for me, or like this hat, like, you know, it's clearly shown that she's not really sort of, kind of like fashion conscious, you know, the same way that everyone else is. And, you know, she sees something and thinks because someone's given it to her, she thinks it's like nice or whatever, or she thinks it's sort of, this great gift. But really, it's kind of like there to embarrass her. So it's just like this combination of like, you know, she kind of almost feels like she's like finally being accepted, and like sort of almost feels like she's part of the in group, just to sort of one more time be the butt of the joke. It was just like that scene. I didn't cry, but I was like very emotionally charged during that scene. So that's where I feel like the movie handled it well. And like I can agree with you that everything is very much on the nose and in your face. The way that like people react to her, the way that people sort of kind of like, you know, every time she's in the room, like everything is like in your face. But for me, it was just like the empathetic side of like sort of her experience of it, and like how she wore it and how she sort of dealt with it essentially.
But that's theatre though. That's the reason why I wasn't really too mad at it, because even though I said it didn't feel like watching a theatre show, there were like, you can still tell that it was still like, this is actually based on a theatre show. So scenes like that, for example, the way that they react to her because she's green, I was cool with that, because like that's a reaction that I'd expect from like an actual theatre show. So you have to remember, there's still a mixture. Do you know what I'm saying? There has to be a mixture between the movie. Like, they need to still capture the essence of what makes this movie so great, which is the theatre show. So that's why I wasn't too angry at that. And the points which I was going to say, because it seems like it seems like you've got an issue with the justification for certain things. Like, for example, you said you had an issue with how come everyone's discriminating against her or treating her badly because she's green, where
it's really just the one point of, it's not like this is a monoculture. It's not like everybody looks the same and she's the one person who's different.
But I feel like
right, like everybody looks different.
I feel like that emphasizes it a little bit more in terms of like, you're in this like multicultural like place or whatever like that, and you even got like talking animals, but the color of her skin specifically is what you can't accept essentially, and what makes her different. I feel like that's what.
Does that make sense?
To me, yeah, a little bit, because like, you know, you're so accepting of like everything else. You're so accepting of like all these animals and this and the other, and like talking animals.
But they're not accepting of, and that's what I was gonna say. Like all the humans. Sorry, carry on. I'll go back to what I was gonna say later. Sorry, carry on.
Like in this, they don't really, like, I agree with Daniel. They don't really handle the whole like animal aspect of it that well at all. Like,
it's completely absent.
How?
Not a single person is prejudiced against the animals.
Yes, they are. That's why I don't get what you guys are saying, because literally the scene where the teacher goat, where he flips over the.
That's the one moment where that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah, but
but nobody talks down to the animals. Nobody marginalizes them. Like, the humans talking amongst each other don't talk about how, don't trust. Like these things take certain forms, right? Like, you can't trust animals, or like there are certain tropes that come with that, right? Kind of elbowing somebody out and not including them and not letting them participate in society and everything, right? And that did not seem like, we don't see animals doing the dirty jobs that humans don't want to do. We don't see anybody express prejudices against the animals. We don't see any kind of tropes, cliches, or anything like that people have about animals. It seems to be just the government.
No, but
you know what I mean?
I understand what you're saying, but that's because they're already part of society, right? So even like with that scene of the chalkboard scene, that was an introduction to pretty much their position in society in terms of how they're treated. So that's for me, I saw that scene as an introduction. And obviously with the monkey scene, that was pretty much the nail on coffin, solidifying. Okay, they're just, so pretty much it was telling me that they have in a way too much power. And that's why the animals.
Which animal has power and why?
As in, they have power because they can speak. But obviously, the main goal from, I don't know what her, the Oz and what's her name? Was she like a sorcerer? The one that was teaching Alpha?
Madame Morrible.
Yeah. That's why it got to the point where they wanted to, I think they were trying to like cage animals and make sure that they couldn't speak.
Yeah. So there's a few things going on, right? So there's this thing about animals should be seen and not heard, right? Which is obviously a real quote, right? From like a quote from real history, right? And the thing is about taking speech away from the animals. And there's the scene when Elphaba has one of her outbursts. She shatters like a sigil, right? This is at the enrollment ceremony, and when like the rock, the stone tablet is is blown away, there's something beneath it that shows kind of the contributions of animals in the past, right? And I think those are the only things. There's and while at the same time there's at least 2 animal professors at the university, right? You've got the goat, and there's like I think a pelican that's like in the background. I think who doesn't have speaking lines, but they are like a professor at the university, right? So, but there's other stuff missing. Like, so here's the thing, right? Like my historical reference for this is the racial purity laws in Germany in the 30s, right? And I'm German, so I'm allowed to make Nazi comparisons, right? So the like there was a whole process of marginalizing and pushing out the Jewish part of the population from like society, and people, like it started with like mandatory signaling, like if you were a Jewish business owner, you had to put a sign in your window, which had the purpose of anybody who gave you business was kind of making a target of themselves, right? And there were purges at universities where anybody who was even mildly disloyal was kicked out. And the reason people participated was that it was a way to advance their careers, right? Because everybody who got purged created a vacancy for somebody else's career advancement. And so there were a lot of people who were willing to go along with it because it benefited them, and so on, right? And like I'm like that's the frame of reference that I'm coming from when I look at stuff like this, and none of that is there, right? So the animal, like the whole thing about like for me the big thing was the animals, right? Because it's a very important, like it's a key part, and it's like the thing that requires the 2 characters to make a choice, right? And they choose opposite things, and that drives the plot, right? And there's nothing there to justify why the wizard is doing this, and number 1, why he's doing this, and number 2, why it works. Like it seems to be just the wizard and Madame Morrible and like the thugs that come to arrest the goat.
In terms of I think the why is going to be kind of like, I think the why is going to be introduced in the second part. However, I do think there's enough, because I think like you don't really need to go into what they're trying to do with the whole animal thing, because I do agree. I personally do think, because I remember, like I said, I read the whole Reddit thing, and I remember someone said about how they see parallels between obviously Oz, pretty much what's happening in Wicked, and Nazi Germany during the World War and other fascist countries. And obviously the point that you said in terms of like how they treated the Jews, and I actually saw some like I can
I
actually
gave
see
like
parallels,
3 examples in which it isn't.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to. They don't have to give like many examples. I think those 3 examples are enough. Like the first example about the chalk. The first, sorry,
1 would be enough.
No, they have
just I honestly, just 2 lines that tells me how the average human thinks about animals in this society, and what the animals get blamed for and why, would be enough.
But they did have 2 lines. Well, it was on the chalkboard.
No, they just said animals get out. That's what it meant.
Yeah,
like,
but
we don't want animals here. But the
that,
why is missing.
But
like, what are the animals being blamed for?
Oh, sorry?
But what are the animals being blamed for? Or
it's
why are the animals a valid target?
Yeah, but it's because they're different. That's the thing. Like literally, like when you're different, like firstly, yes, it's just because they're different. Like that when you're different, you're just treated for some reason. That's, you know what I'm saying, you're just treated badly.
I like no, but like for like this systemic sort of for it's almost like not a genocide on the animals, but if you're sort of going through the lens of if you're going through the lens of removing the abilities for animals to speak and like locking them up in cages and sort of completely erasing them from from history, there has to be a motivation for that, and I don't feel like the movie gave it enough motivation. I feel like the storyline with the animals was very much absent for large parts of the movie, and that's very for a movie that's 2 hours and 41 minutes, and this is a big part of kind of like Elphaba's motivation to go against the wizard, and a big part of a motivation to so for her and Belinda to be on opposite sides. It's like it's criminally lacking how little they actually put into the whole like animal subplot, and them kind of like going missing, and like why they're starting to be afraid for their lives, and why they're being removed from universities. Like a lot of that is completely missing. And I understand what you're saying about the chalkboard scene, but it's unmotivated. It's like there isn't enough justification as to why that's happening. There isn't enough justification.
It's a symptom of the prejudice. It's not the motivation.
Okay, that still doesn't make sense, because for example, right, in real, like in the world today, like racism, like the motivation behind racism is little as well. Like you ask a bunch of white people why they're racist. Like they generally don't have, a lot of times they don't have a reason. Like
but
it's because
they may not articulate it, but there are reasons, right?
So
back in the day,
it often has to do with, so it depends on the place, and this is not the right forum.
No, but I was going to say the reason generally is just because of the skin color. Is because their skin color is different. That's the whole point I was going to make. Same with like the way that Elf was treated. You lot are saying there's not really justification as why she's treated the way that she's treated. It's because she's different as her skin color. The animals, because they're different, they can speak. They're just, you know what I'm saying? Like they're different from the people who are currently the heads of society, if that makes sense. Humans, you know what I'm saying? Like just the reason why I disagree with what you guys are saying is because the motivation behind discrimination in society right now is not enough, in my opinion. So that's kind of like a true reflection of, what the movie portrayed is pretty much a true reflection of how society is.
Even if you look at today's, like, you might feel like, some people have carried on, like, and again, it's probably not the best place to talk about this, but you might feel like some people have like inherited certain prejudices and certain viewpoints against people of like whatever background, but there's always like historical context behind why certain like groups are oppressed, or why like certain groups are like marginalized and this and the other. There's like historical context, historical like reasons why, like, and whether it's to do with control, money, power, or whatever, there's always an underlying reason for treating one group of humans as subclass or like less human, is essentially. And I'm not saying that this movie needed to get that deep, and the movie didn't need to speak on like the history of racism or anything like that, but it just needed to, like, I have no clue what the wizard's deal was. I have no clue why he wants to do what he wants to do to animals. I don't know why he wants to be the bad guy, apart from the fact that he's.
But this is part one, though.
Yeah. But I think none of us have read or seen The Wizard of Oz, right? In Europe, in general, it's not taught in schools. It's not a common thing. We may have seen the movie by chance, but it's not generally a story we're terribly familiar with. I still haven't seen the movie in its entirety. I've seen some clips. But the basic deal with the wizard is that he's from Earth, and he found his way to Oz by chance, and he's basically a con artist who scammed everybody into believing he was a wizard. That's the deal with this machinery that makes him look big and imposing, and so on. But it's really just, you've heard the phrase, don't look at the man behind the curtain. This is where that comes from, because behind the curtain is just a guy who's pushing buttons. He's nothing special. He just knows how to put on a good show and fool people. So that's the wizard, right? So the idea that he needs to blame Oz's problems on a minority that can't defend itself, that's enough. But even that would be enough in my view. But that still isn't, like, I don't know what Oz's problems are because we don't see any, right? So like whenever like there's an upswell in discrimination or xenophobia, it's generally a scarcity response. It's this whole idea of there's not enough for all of us, and so my group has to fight your group, and only one of us can win, right? Fundamentally, that's the racist viewpoint, that there are discrete groups of people, and they fight each other, and only one can win, and you either win or you get crushed. That's the racist worldview. And if you have that worldview, if you believe that is really true, then a lot of what these people do makes sense. It's just not true. It's just not how the world actually works. And I don't understand why it works that way in Oz. Like, what is the societal problem that's being deflected and blamed on the animals, for example, right? I didn't notice any. And we are like in an upper class, like private university, right? And maybe that's not to be expected that we see that reflected there. But at some point, the movie should have told us what it was, right? Like, what is the problem that people want to blame on the animals?
Okay, so you guys can generally not see or view as, someone discriminating against someone else, someone being racist against someone, same thing, being prejudiced towards someone else because...
Of course that exists, but it has some kind of context where it came from. Why this group, and why in this way, and why this particular trope? For example, when I was growing up in Germany in the 90s, everybody knew that Polish people were thieves and criminals. And there was a socioeconomic reason for that. And that's where the stereotype that Polish people are criminals came from. Like if today you're Polish and in Germany and somebody refuses to hire you or refuses to rent an apartment to you because they've internalized this idea that Polish people are criminals, that's arbitrary and irrational, but it comes from somewhere. That's what I'm talking about.
No, I get that. I understand, like, for example, stereotypes can, for especially like black people, stereotypes is that they're violent. So I understand how, the reason for why people believe that, or they don't like black people or racist towards black people is because obviously the stereotype is that they're all violent, gangbangers, drug dealers, etc., etc. So I get that. But sometimes when you're just growing up in like, for example, let's say, for example, there's a child that grows up in a racist family, he grows up to be racist, and a lot of the times he won't even know why he doesn't like, let's say, for example, black people. It's just because he grew up in that environment. So my point is, like, a lot of them may have just grown up in an environment where, because I remember when their dad saw the child, right, and then he just saw that she was green, and it was like, crap, that she's green, she's different. So already he pretty much didn't like her off rip. So now I'm pretty sure that it was like, that's a reflection of when I saw that scene, I was like, okay, that's pretty much what society is going to be like. That's an introduction of what society is going to be like, and their reaction to what's different from them is pretty much they're seeing them as inferior. And that's how I feel like society can be as well. Like sometimes, like the reasoning for why a lot of people are racist or prejudiced or discriminatory to other people, and it doesn't a lot, like the reason could be just because like they see people as inferior. The people that are different, they see them as inferior. That's the justification for me, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I get that, and that's like very like simplistic, and that's like very like, again, surface level, but it just ties back to what Daniel was saying at the start of this, is like, if this is going to be a big part of the movie and this is going to be a critical part of why there's conflict within this, shouldn't it be more than that? Shouldn't it be more than just, oh, well, some people are like, racist and some people discriminate against people? It should be, we should understand why these things happen, like why a certain group can be viewed a certain way, whether it like may be true or not or whatever, and then what are the learnings from it? Because if this movie is saying this person is just like, these animals are being discriminated against just because they're animals, it's like, what? Okay, that's great. What do we then learn from that? Like, what's the movie teaching us? What's like kind of like the moral of the story from this? Is like, we haven't really gotten anything from it. It's like, okay, yeah, I already knew that like some people are just like racist, but it's just like, there should be a lot more depth to it, and there should be a lot more again, when people are comparing this to 1930s and this and the other, like you just have to handle these things with a lot more I wouldn't even like with a lot more respect, like in terms of how you're even portraying it. Like you just have to like give it the proper respect it deserves, and the proper the proper time, and the proper the proper like time, just like flesh it out throughout the story. Because what, like there's nothing interesting about me going to a movie and seeing, oh, these group of people are being discriminated against just because it's not interesting. Like there's nothing there for me to grasp at, and again, that's probably why I feel the way I feel about that aspect of the story, and that's probably why Daniel completely hates it much more than I do, is because there's nothing there to grasp onto. There's nothing there to kind of like evoke any type of emotion. It's just like, oh, these animals are being discriminated against, and it's like, okay, cool.
So there's this phrase, never again, right? And I don't need to explain where it comes from, but part of that is that you understand why it happens. Yeah. If you if you go through our videos this year, I have in a number of different occasions criticized lazy social commentary, right? Because I actually think it's not just bad storytelling, it's also dangerous, because it teaches this view that some people are just bad, and that's all there is to it, and that's all you need to know. And if you are actually interested in the world being less prejudiced and less hateful, then on some level you have to at least try to understand why this stuff exists, even just on like it is still irrational. Like I said, like I gave my example about how Polish people are thieves. That is not true, has never been true, but there's a reason why people believe it. And if you disregard that completely, then you cannot fix it. Currently, there's an anti-immigration party in Germany on the rise. They're number 3, I think, in German politics. They essentially run the eastern half of the country now. It's only a matter of time before they make it into parliament. And many people believe that they are just bad people. There's no reason for why this happens, why this resonates with people. And for as long as that is true, there's nothing you can do to reach out to the people who might join them or support them. That is where I'm coming from with this, right? Same thing, like we have the same thing in the UK with Brexit, right? People have not moved on in the last 10 years from people who voted for Brexit are just stupid and ignorant, which may or may not be true in any specific case, right? But at some point you have to understand why people take that stance, right? And if you refuse to understand it, or even that there's a possibility of understanding it, then you're not helping anybody and you're making it worse. And this movie contributes to that.
I get what you guys are saying, but at the same time, like what I said before, this is still part one, so it's just introduction. So I get it. Like,
but
even
it was
though you
also
are
2.5
introducing the world,
hours. That was enough
true.
time.
I agree. Even though you are introducing the world, you still kind of have to, like, there has
all
to
it
be.
Takes. Sorry. All it takes is to change a couple of lines. Have just a couple of lines where human students are talking to each other about animals, and just show us what the prejudice is and why it makes sense to them and why it has an emotional appeal to them. That's all I'm asking for.
But I think the revelation.
That's all you would have needed, and you do not get this in this movie.
But I think the revelation about why this prejudice towards the animal is going to come out in part 2. But in terms of the prejudice towards Elphaba, I think that's pretty much solidified. I think the reason for her is just because she's different.
Yeah.
That's what I
and
think.
Can I just say, I think because she's one person, like that reaction is a lot more, it rings a lot more true. I still think it's a little bit of just a collection of cliches. I still think in that world, it doesn't really make sense for somebody who looks a bit different to be that poorly received. But given that, her personal, like, a lot of it is about her personal experience of being treated this way, and I think that works. I think it's not the deepest, but it works. It feels authentic enough. The thing that really gets me is there is precedent in fairy tales and in fantasy stories about, like, skin color being like a mark of evil or a mark of sin or something like that. And if it was that, I would have said, okay, I recognize this trope. It's fine. I get it. That's the kind of world this is. But that's also missing, right? But I think the part where it really becomes a problem is with the animals, because that is a massive part of the story. And it's also the systemic part. This is a strategy on the part of the wizard with a political goal in mind. And so there has to be a reason for picking on this group in this way, right? That's all I'm just saying, right?
Yeah, no, I understand. And like I said, I still think it's going to come out in part 2, because I remember there was a scene where she, like, there was a scene where she saw the goat in the cage. I don't remember fully. You guys know what I'm talking about? Where
it was a lion.
Was that a lion?
Yeah.
No.
Is it the lion from Wizard of Oz? I don't know.
No. The other scene when she was spying on the goat, and then she got some sort of vision where she went to the future, and then she saw the goat in the cage.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think more of that is going to be revealed in part 2. I'm just assuming. I don't know what the hell part 2 is going to be. I haven't seen the fair show at all, but I'm just assuming. But I hear what you guys are saying. Like I said, for me, I think the justification was enough. Even though you guys do, I understand why you're saying it is pretty much a simple justification. Obviously, the subject matter is very big. However, I'm just viewing it as her being an outcast, like what it feels like to be an outcast in an environment where you're the different one. So that's how I viewed it. You know what I'm saying? But I do get what you guys are saying. There has to be, like, I get it. There has to be, a justification or reason why she's getting discriminated as brutal as she is. So I get that.
But it's just there's so much time, like over 2 hours that we spend at the university, that they could have done so much more, and they neglected to. That's just my thing. So now that we've solved racism, let's move on. So I think, like, another really big problem I had with this was the music. Like, I think I saw the musical like 15 years ago or something like that. Like, I have a distant memory of seeing it, but I have no specific memory of it. I don't know exactly how the songs go, or like this defying gravity. Like that's something I recognize, but that's about it. Was it just me, or were they most of the songs, like, there's like 2 that I kind of enjoyed, but the others were kind of really drowned out by how they were produced? Like, was that just me, or?
No, I agree with you. Like, even the opening, at that point I thought I was in for a long ride, because I just wasn't hooked by sort of that opening scene. And this is meant to be like the opening to your musical, so, like, I feel like, that and your ending need to be like, 2 of your, like, biggest set pieces in there. And I just wasn't really feeling anything at all, like, while they were kind of like going on. It just kind of like rang a little bit hollow, to be honest. I mean, not to say that I didn't enjoy any of the music at all in this, but it just, like, if I compare it to like other musicals, like, obviously, like, you have like historicals, like, Grease, we grew up in like High School Musical and stuff like that. There's like kind of like iconic things that you can kind of remember from it, but this just didn't really have much. I don't know. It's like really difficult to speak on the music because it was just like so forgettable for me. And I'm generally trying to think of like even like any of like the sequences, like dance sequences that were like standoutish. And I'm drawing a blank. And maybe it's because
I've got two.
Go on, you can.
So one of them was in the library with like the rotating bookshelves. I thought that looked cool, and there's like a lot of physicality to it. They use the foreground, the background, and everything. And the other one was the makeover, which also has like the expanding suitcases and stuff like that, and the mirror folds backwards, and it becomes like a dancing stage, and like that one showed some creativity. The others, not so much. Like not all of them are bad, but especially towards the end, it felt like they were drifting in and out of songs. Like they were kind of like what I'm expecting from a musical is that you've got plot that sets up a song, and then you've got the song, and then you've got the next setup for the next song, right? That's kind of how I know musicals, right? And I don't know if the Wicked musical is like this, but it seemed, especially in the last half hour, where they would have dialogue and they would start singing for a couple of lines, and then they would stop and they would have normal dialogue again, and then they would launch into a different song, but again stop after a couple of verses. It seemed weird, and if that is what it was in the musical, then I don't think it's very good. Like it seems very disjointed and very disorienting. Like I kept waiting for the song to start, and it never did. Especially like in the last dialogue between Elphaba and Glinda, where they have their big crossroads moment, right? It seemed to be there where it wasn't just one song that kind of expressed what these characters were feeling, and then we've got the next song or something. It would keep launching and in and out of different songs, right? Was it just me or?
No, I agree. For my main issue with it was it felt kind of all the same. Because I from what I last time I watched the musical was probably High School Musical. I think I may have seen something else, but I don't remember. I think the last one I actually fully remember was High School Musical, and I think what I remember from musicals obviously the song that they sing is a reflection of the mood. And even though, like for example, there were moments where let's say for example they're sad, right? Even the song that they would sing still kind of felt kind of upbeat. So I'm like, this isn't really a true, like it doesn't feel like a true reflection of how you're feeling. It just feels like you're just singing this song just to sing it because it's a musical. So for me, I felt like this tone was very the same. Like even though sometimes it did start off slow, but it still kind of got upbeat, if that makes sense. So I just felt like a lot of times for me, it was just like it was just all the same. So that's why it didn't none of them resonate for me besides the ending, besides the last one, but that's a song that's pretty much been advertised all over TikTok, all over social media. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know if that is because I don't know musicals well enough, if that's just how it is. But like I've watched musicals where I kind of got like this is catchy. Like this may not speak to me in any real way, but it's catchy, and I'm enjoying myself. And I kept waiting for that to happen here, and it, like I said, it happened in a few places, but not that many.
I think it might be a thing if I remember, because I did watch the new Matilda, which was a musical, and that was actually a really good movie in itself. And I do
but
feel
it's also
like,
because that's written by Tim Minchin, and Tim Minchin is a legend.
Yeah, sure. But in terms of like the singing part, where they like kind of like maybe sing a few lines without going into a song, if I remember correctly, there are moments like that in that movie. If I remember correctly, but yeah, that's that. The other kind of like highlight I had was just Galinda as a character. Like she for me was just, again, like I said at the start, just like captivating. Like just like her mannerisms, sort of the way that she spoke, the way that she like interacted with like everyone. Like I'm trying to think of like specific examples, like even like the whole like makeover scene and stuff like that. It was just like she just like radiated like pure energy, and you were just kind of just, I don't know, just like hooked by sort of like everything she was doing, even like the flick of the hair and this, that, and the other, and like sort of repeating and stuff like that. Like it was all just executed perfectly for me, her character, and she just like encompassed that character just brilliantly. Like,
yeah, honestly, even her reaction to the way that she was getting abused felt so like real, but at the same time, like you could feel it for her, especially when
Who abused Glinda?
No, when she was just getting abused by society, just by the people around her.
Glinda.
That's not Galinda. Galinda was Ariana Grande's character.
Oh crap! Sorry, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad. Galinda, she was good as well. Her individual performance was amazing as well. I was surprised by the way.
You had like, yeah, and what
she was
she
there
did
pretty
well.
much. So I was just gonna say she is pretty much the comedy that was needed for the show. But yeah, sorry, carry on.
She had like interesting moments in there as well. Is that like sort of at certain points where you could see that she's used to getting her way like every single time, and then there was like a few moments where she didn't, or she saw someone else being elevated to a stage that she sort of wanted to achieve, but she couldn't get, and this, that, and the other, and like just like her reactions to that was like it like added like a nice level of sort of kind of like complexity to a character, and then again it goes back to sort of the whole like discussion between like her and Alphabet of like sort of how she kind of like weaponizes her niceness and like weaponizes her charm to like kind of like get people to sort of do what she wants. So sort of getting that boy to sort of take Alphabet's sister on a date so that she can go and get her like Prince Charming, and even you can almost even feel it with like just like her whole like relationship with like Alphabet. It was just, I understand that she felt bad for like sort of Alphabet helped her out, but then she set her up to sort of kind of be whatever. But it was like that niceness because Alphabet had a certain level of status, not because she was genuinely a kind person. Compared to like what Alphabet was like, where she, had a lot of empathy for like the people around her, had like empathy for her sister. Whenever she like after she felt like sort of there was like some type of like common ground between like her and Galinda, she sort of went through the trouble of like trying to get at like something that she like really cared about because she did something for like Alphabet of like and a person that she cared about a lot. So I felt like there was like the dynamic between the two of them. I think the chemistry and the dynamic that they had between the two of them was like were excellent in throughout the movie. I feel.
Yeah, I did like the dynamic between Elphaba, Glinda, and Fiyero, because those three getting along makes some like it shouldn't, right, on paper, right? They're too different, but for some reason it kind of works, right? And that can happen in real life where people who are very different can just get along, right, because of shared experience or whatever. And I also like the contrast between Glinda and Fiyero because they're both kind of ditzy, but in very different ways, right? I think Fiyero is much more sincere about his niceness. He's just never it's never come with a price for him, right? And it comes with a price for the first time in the story, and he's not sure how to deal with it, right? I thought that was interesting. And I would just wish that dynamic had been more central in the first, like let's say we have an introduction of half an hour, and we've got 90 minutes of their friendship, where they have shared and also different experiences at Shiz, right? So can't take that name seriously, but that's what it is. And we understand why they are friends, and then we understand in the last half hour why they go take different paths, right? I think that should have been the core of the movie, and I think they had much more than enough time to actually make that work. And they had plenty of time to kind of show us what the formative experiences of these characters are that get them to that place where they then have to make that decision. And then if we understand that decision, it's more resonant, it's more engaging, and it gets to you more than if it happens very suddenly. I think that's the big failing of this movie. I think that it doesn't flesh out those three characters. It does that. You can point to scenes and moments where we are shown what kind of people they are. But I think there's so much that this movie is so long that you cannot say we didn't have time for this, right? Yes, you had time. You just chose to spend it on something else. And I think that is kind of the big flaw in this movie, that it spends it on things that are not as interesting or that are not conducive to the final point of the movie, which is when there's an actual choice to make with an actual cost. The three of them make completely different choices, and we have to be on board with each of those choices. Otherwise, it doesn't really work. And for most people, apparently that was good enough, because I've seen nothing but praise, even from people who aren't typical, like who aren't the core audience of this. We might just be the most negative review of this. That's pretty much out there outside of 4chan or something. I don't know. But like everybody seems to be on board with that dynamic, and I just wasn't, because I thought it was too rushed and too abbreviated. And like, especially given the amount of time that there was. And also because I've seen other stories like this that just did it so much better. And I think it might be that this movie is too close to the musical, because I can kind of see, like Jonathan, you mentioned this kind of earlier, that in a musical you have certain limitations for how many locations and how many characters and how much detail and how much time and so on. But a movie doesn't have any of those limitations. And so if you don't lean into the strengths of your medium, then you're doing it wrong, in my opinion. And I think this, like, the point of a movie adaptation is to tell the same story, but leaning into the strength of movies, as opposed to whatever medium it came from. In this case, a musical or a book or whatever, right? And I don't think it does that. I think it's so faithful to the original based on everything I've seen that it neglects to tell the story slightly differently. Or like in a movie, you have backgrounds, and you can afford much more detail, for instance, right? You can have more characters, you can have bigger locations, you can have more locations, and so on. And it feels like this movie simply doesn't take advantage of that. And I think a lot of the flaws that we've talked about come from that musical limitation, where things have to be very exaggerated and you are very limited, right? And I think if it had taken more liberties, it would have been a better version of the same story, I think.
I think we might have spoken about a lot, even though we actually, I was gonna say, even though we haven't actually asked questions, I think we covered most of what we want to discuss today. So, last thoughts.
I love this one, but it's okay. It's been a fun ride.
Is that your last thought?
No. Last thoughts, more enjoyable than I thought it would be. But I actually probably have to agree with Daniel. Like it's maybe too faithful of an adaptation, and maybe, you know, with adaptation, you're kind of like adapting it to a different sort of like media format, and this one failed to properly, you know, maximize the sort of cinema format for its musical adaptation, sort of compared to it being on theatre and Broadway. So yeah, with that said, like it was still enjoyable. Like I think it was still like a really good sort of cinema experience. So I'll give it like I'll give it a solid 7.5 out. I'll give it 7.5 out of 10, mainly just for how I enjoyed Ethelbald's character and Galinda's character a lot in this movie. So I'll give it a 7.5.
Yeah, for me, I had a really good time. I think the highlights were definitely individual performances. Like pretty much Galinda was like a human embodiment of what ends to a means actually means. And what's her name?
Elphaba.
Yeah. She was pretty much a representation of being an outcast. So for me, it was enough. I do understand what obviously Daniel and Herbie were saying, and I like after hearing what they were saying, just because sometimes I like to admit when I'm wrong, but I will agree that I do think my reasoning, as in my justification, isn't enough for this subject matter because it is very big. So I will agree on that. However, for me, it was enough, even though I do agree that it wasn't enough, if that makes sense. Surprisingly, I'm actually going to give a lower rating than Hervé. I'm actually giving this a 7. Even though I did have a really good time, but it's just like, it is a musical. I think it would have been, if this wasn't a musical, if there was a music season there, it was just pure story, I would have probably given this an 8 or 8, maybe like an 8. Yeah, 8. I'm not gonna say 8, but I'm probably giving it an 8. But because the music just isn't for me, man. I just don't know if I'm ever gonna watch a musical where I'm like, that's gonna be well, I'm just gonna like it. I don't know. But yeah, the music scenes, it just wasn't for me. So I think that kind of I think that dragged it out. I think that dragged it out for me. So yeah, I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, for me, I think it is dragged down by its complete lack of world building. It squanders its time on things that could be used to flesh out both its themes and message, and as well as its characters. And it just wastes so much. Like a movie that is this long should be able to do all of those things in much more detail and much better. And it just mismanages its time, and it doesn't really understand what the core thing of the story, I think, is, which is bringing these characters to a point where they're at this crossroads, and then they make a choice, and we have to understand and empathize with that choice. Otherwise, the story doesn't work. And for me, the story didn't work because of that. So for that reason, I'm giving it a pink out of green.
All right, cool. Well, guys, thank you very much for tuning into today's discussion. Let's say discussion. Yeah, thank you for tuning into today's discussion. Hervé?
Yeah, I mean, let us know your thoughts down below. What did you think of the movie? Did you enjoy the musical aspects? Did we solve racism? Yes or no? Let us know down below in the comments. And if you'd like to
put a poll up in the community tab.
Yeah. But yeah, if you liked the review, tell a friend. And if you hated it, tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
Thank you, guys. We'll catch you next time. Au revoir.
Bye-bye.